Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into an emotional tug-of-war that, honestly, almost every single one of us has faced at some point. We're talking about that incredibly tough balancing act between loving our family and fiercely protecting the absolute peace of our own homes. It's a heavy topic for sure, but we're going to unpack a fascinating source today that breaks down this exact dilemma, entirely through a biblical lens.
So let's start with a really tough question. Are you actually obligated to open your front doors to family members who bring chaos and destruction with them? Our source material tackles this silent guilt that so many believers carry around. There's this super common idea, a totally false equivalence really, that Christian love means giving toxic relatives absolutely unlimited, unchecked access to your life and your personal space. People feel like, well, they're family, I have to let them in, even if those individuals essentially destroy the sanctuary of their home. But the source, it argues that true discernment requires a radically different approach.
Right away, we run into this massive core conflict. On one hand, you've got the cultural expectation screaming, "Family is family," which implies this kind of unconditional all-access pass. But on the other side, the source presents a very clear biblical warning. Your spiritual environment is vastly more important than blood ties. The text actually brings up Jesus' own words in Matthew 10 and Luke 14, where he literally warned that following him could actually cause family division. The overarching point here is that your loyalty to God and the peace of your environment absolutely cannot be sabotaged by family pressure, because what you allow into your physical space, that shapes your spiritual space. To help us navigate this, the source outlines 6 very specific profiles of relatives that you need to keep out.
So who actually makes this list? Let's get into it. Profile number 1 is what the source calls the peacebreaker. We're talking about relatives who literally just do not know how to live in peace. They destroy homes from the inside, but they do it slowly and silently. They aren't necessarily the ones shouting, right? Instead, they're the ones constantly sowing discord, playing one family member against another, and forcing you to take part in these endless wars that you didn't even start.
The source introduces this incredibly relatable concept of the invisible suitcase. We all know someone who brings more baggage to a family dinner than you take on a transatlantic flight. When the peacebreaker crosses your threshold, they immediately unpack gossip, constant criticism, and all these ancient conflicts right there in your living room. And the text points out something so true. Long after they've actually driven away, the atmosphere in your house stays incredibly heavy. You're just left sitting there, dealing with the residual tension and arguments they left hanging in the air. To really back this up, the source points to Romans 16:17 as a core text, and this verse explicitly says to avoid them. Notice it doesn't say, seat them at your table and try to fix them. The text interprets this as a hard, direct command to actively defend your peace. Because here's the thing, peace doesn't just magically happen. You have to intentionally protect it from people who only want to drag their personal wars into your home. All right, that brings us to profile 2, the willful sinner. Now, this is where the source aggressively pushes back against those deeply ingrained cultural traditions. The ones that tell us we have to welcome relatives, even if they're living in deep, unrepentant addictions or blatant infidelity, just because we happen to share the same DNA.
But the text counters that cultural norm hard with 1 Corinthians 5:11. Now let's be super clear. This isn't about judging a relative who is struggling and needs prayer. The source makes a really sharp distinction here. This is about preventing what it calls spiritual contagion from those who proudly celebrate sin and normalize that rebellion right at your dinner table. The warning here is stark. By giving them full access, you're actually exposing your own kids and your family to toxic influences, making that rebellion look perfectly acceptable.
Moving on to profile 3, we encounter a much more active threat, the faith attacker. These are the relatives who cross the line from just having a simple ideological disagreement into open, active mockery. According to the text, these are the folks who will come over, sit in your own house, eat your food, and then actively ridicule your deepest convictions. They're dropping passive-aggressive jokes about you going to church, criticizing your tithing, or even intentionally using God's name in vain just to get a rise out of you. The source pulls 0 punches here, bringing in 2 John 1:10. The perspective shared is that welcoming someone who actively attacks your faith into your home is essentially holding your front door wide open for darkness. The material emphasizes that your home is meant to be an altar, a true refuge of light. It suggests that yes, you should absolutely love them from a distance and pray for them, but it establishes a rock-solid boundary. You must never, ever negotiate God's honor just to be liked by a relative.
Then we've got profile 4, the violent relative. The source describes these individuals as literal walking time bombs, totally dominated by anger. They explode over the absolute smallest things, slam doors, and basically live in a constant state of aggression. And what's deeply concerning is how often the source notes this kind of abuse is just tolerated or even justified by Christians who write it off as simply respecting our elders or dealing with a quote-unquote strong personality.
But as the text highlights, anger is highly contagious. It literally transfers. And interestingly enough, modern psychology absolutely backs up this ancient wisdom from Proverbs 22. Emotional states easily transfer between people. The core message here is super simple. If a relative brings shouting and fear into your space, they automatically lose the privilege of entering it. Period. Your living room should never become an emotional war zone just because you're afraid to set a firm boundary. And speaking of setting boundaries, that leads right into Profile 5, the gossip and meddler. The source identifies this as the exact point where most people totally cave to guilt. These are the relatives who treat your shared last name as a lifelong VIP pass to just drop in unannounced, openly judge your parenting choices, and shamelessly interfere with your marriage. The text demands a massive mindset shift right here. It reframes this behavior. It's not family love. It is actually control disguised as family. When you finally try to set a boundary, these meddlers love to hit you with guilt trips like, "But I changed your diapers." While pulling from Genesis 2:24, the source argues that you and your spouse are the highest earthly authority under your own roof. Setting a boundary against this kind of manipulation isn't rejecting your family. It's just building a necessary, healthy wall to protect your own home and marriage. Finally, we reach Profile 6, the spiritual drainer. Now, unlike the active attackers we talked about earlier, these folks are passive. They aren't necessarily loud or aggressive, but they function like a massive, heavy anchor tied to your ankle. Every single time you talk to them, you just feel totally empty afterwards. They complain constantly, they view literally everything through a lens of overwhelming negativity, and they actively hinder your divine calling by telling you your devotion is fanatical and to just be normal. To put this into perspective, the sources points to Mark chapter 3, reminding us that even Jesus' earthly family thought he was out of his mind and actively tried to stop his ministry. The big takeaway? If you wait for everyone in your family to understand your purpose, you are going to be stuck waiting forever.
So, pulling this all together, the source provides us with a really clear framework. For all 6 profiles, from the peacebreaker all the way down to the spiritual drainer, the required action is all about restriction and protection. Across the board, the text uses these biblical principles to totally redefine the concept of family access. It frames access to your life as a granted privilege, not a birthright just because you happen to be related.
And that brings us to this absolutely crucial conclusion from the source. Setting boundaries is not an act of pride, and it definitely doesn't mean you lack love. It is actually the highest expression of spiritual maturity and stewardship. The framework suggests that there are just some family members you literally have to love from a distance. You can bless them, absolutely, but without giving them access to your inner circle and your home's intimacy. Because ultimately, spiritual alignment will always outweigh blood ties.
We're going to wrap up with this incredibly empowering mantra directly from the source material. Only what comes from God is allowed into my home. Wow. It leaves us with such a provocative question to chew on. Does your open door policy actually reflect your values, or does it really just reflect your guilt? It's a powerful challenge presented by the text to step up and reclaim your mental peace and your spiritual authority starting today. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this structured breakdown helps you navigate setting your own healthy boundaries. Keep learning, stay strong, and I'll see you next time.